When someone acts out of love, but everything goes wrong, was the decision still good? We often judge a choice by looking at what happened next. If the outcome was good, we assume the decision was right. If the outcome was painful, we wonder whether the decision was wrong. But what if someone had good motives, followed biblical principles, and still caused harm that they never intended? This time on Reverberate, we look at Ecclesiastes, modern ethical systems, and Little House on the Prairie, and ask, how should Christians judge a decision when doing right goes wrong? Let's get into it. So, as I was working on compiling these questions, I happened to be watching, there's a Netflix remake of Little House on the Prairie. And follow me for a second.
It's a great show, by the way. I've watched the whole thing.
Yeah,
Almost watched it again after I finished watching.
Nice.
Yeah, it's actually pretty. I'm only episode maybe 3 or 4, but so I was thinking about these questions about pursuing good, making decisions, future planning, and a lot of it, the conversation's been around, I make a decision and either a good thing happens or it doesn't quite go my way. And that's been where the conversation's surrounding. There's a situation in this show, and spoiler alert for anyone who might be watching it, the show's a lot more serious than the 70s show. But the dad, part of his backstory is his younger brother went to war, the Civil War, came back and was seriously battling with PTSD and going crazy and needed some serious help. So Pa Ingalls was pushing his brother to seek help, and he was fighting with his dad over whether or not the brother should be sent off to go to doctors in another state or something. And as they were fighting, the brother heard the conversation and ran away, and it's implied that he ended up drowning in a river. So I bring that up to say Charles Ingalls was trying to do something good. He was, out of brotherly love, was seeking the best for his brother. And that decision to try to seek help ultimately led in his brother's demise. But he was actively trying to do good. And we can think of real life examples of, I'm actively pursuing something I think is good. All my motivations are right. I'm doing the right thing. And then something really bad happens as a direct result. You seek help for a family member and then they go further into alcoholism, or you see something not right, quite right at your business, you bring it up, but then the business crumbles and now you don't have income. Or just, we can think of so many examples. If you're pursuing the right thing and then something bad happens as a direct result, if someone has gone through that, how should they view that decision? Because in a previous conversation, you talked about how we kind of have this tendency to apply morality to the end result of a decision. So I guess, is it possible to make a good decision, have something really bad happen, and it still be a good decision, and that you can rest in that?
There's a couple ways to head on answering this. One is maybe a little more the nerdy way, which is to talk about the large categories of ethical systems. One would be consequentialists, that something is right or wrong based on its consequences. That's an outcome-oriented thing. The thing that is particularly difficult about that is that we, as present creatures who can't live in or know the future, therefore have no real way to know the morality of a present action if it's only determined by its consequences. But if you read a fair number of secular philosophers, a fair number of just popular culture things, you will hear stuff that sounds absolutely like that. Something that we as Christians have to examine, like, can I even make that decision that way? Another category would be called deontology, which is essentially there are strict rules or duties that you have to follow. So the contrast would be like lying is wrong if it produces a bad result. That is a consequentialist conclusion. Deontology would emphasize duties. So lying is always wrong, period, no matter what, just that action wrong. And we'd get into questions like, how exactly do we define lying? And there's some nuance and difficulty there. The other big category is roughly virtue ethics. So the character of the person who is involved is what matters. Is your character reflecting of some higher standard of virtue at some way, which could be secular, that could be a Greek philosophy, or that could be a Christian sense of reflecting God's character. Really, for Christians, I think there's kind of a mix of duties. We've been giving commands, but part of why we're giving commands is to shape and conform us to the image of Christ, which is essentially a higher virtue context. So from a theological nerd standpoint, you would say it is possible then for something to be a good decision. You make it your character is good in the decision, the conduct that you actually did, what you actually did was in fact good, or at least not sinful, right? One way or the other. And your motive was good. So we can talk about character, conduct, and motive. It is possible for you to have all three of those be absolutely wonderfully good things and for a bad result to happen. Yes, that's definitely possible. We could also test this in maybe a little bit more mundane sounding ways. If you pursue the right kind of medical treatment according to medical knowledge of the day, does it always produce healing? No. If you pursue, in fact, what is good medical treatment, does it always produce healing? No. We could talk about, does a wise investment always make money? No. Not according to anything except consequentialist kind of thinking. Sometimes you say, this is a wise way to invest money from everything that I can possibly know right now, and you do it, and it doesn't make money. That is possible. Now, generally speaking, the pattern is part of what makes it wise. The pattern is you're investing in the kinds of things and the ways that tend to produce income or profit. Or we could talk even maybe a little bit more of a silly example. Sorry, college football fans, if you're a Georgia fan or an Alabama fan, but there were two examples from 2013. I remember Auburn playing Georgia. I'm pretty sure it was Georgia. And at the end of the game, Auburn's down, and they heave one down the middle of the field. And this guy is double covered, and the safety and the cornerback or whoever it was, they both come in from Georgia. They both come in, and either one of them could have picked off the ball. It was underthrown, receivers running. They both come in. They deflect the ball because they got in each other's way, and it bounced to the receiver who ran in and scored. And Auburn won the game. Same year, Alabama is tied at the end of the game, and they kick a field goal, try one, 50-something yards. The guy kicks it short, and Auburn had a guy back, and he catches it, and he runs it back for a touchdown, and Auburn wins the game last second. Now, was it the right decision? Was it a good decision to kick the field goal? In 99.9% of situations, yes. But that time, the outcome was not what they wanted. Now, I know this doesn't feel the emotional weight. Actually, for Alabama fans, it probably does. But it's not the same thing as, I encourage this guy to go to the doctor and he drowned, right? That feels a little different. But the principle is the same. The right decision, the cornerback and the safety went for the ball. We would never tell them, no, definitely don't go after the ball. That's a terrible decision. Even though the result wasn't what they wanted, but they pursued what was the good decision with the information. Now, they should have talked and only one of them gone and got, sure, fine. But you still look at it and go, no, there were right decisions that produced outcomes that weren't what you wanted. We instinctively know that's still the right decision. In the sports world, we even have a phrase for that. We call it a Monday morning quarterback. That's the guy who on Monday says, oh, they made all the wrong decisions, even though they were all the right decisions from what they knew at the time, but the outcome wasn't. So broaden that, take it from a silly example or a nerdy example and say, no, within my life, there are times that I make what is a good decision based on biblical principles from everything I know. We also have to say there's times that I think I am making a good decision that I then later look back and say, I see where my motive was wrong. Not just it must have been wrong, but I see where I had a bad motive. I see where I was not following God's command in this area. So it's possible that you could believe it is good, look back later and realize, no, actually, I was sinful in this. That is a possibility. But it's also possible that you made a really great decision with all the information you had, and the result wasn't what you wanted it to be. And that's just part of what we have. Daniel in the lion's den. I'm not going to worship this king. I am going to pray to my God like I always do. That is a good decision. And that night he was in the lion's den. At that moment, we'd have to say, if you're looking at that specific outcome in the moment, you go, this didn't work out. Now, of course, we know the end of the story, and he gets out, and so all those kinds of things, sure. But there still is this sense that at least at moments, at least in stretches or seasons of our lives, there could be times when you say this caused so much harm, but it was wise and was good.
And I think that it's very important, let me just say that, to reject that consequentialist understanding of morality and ethics, because if you don't, God is not wise. Take, for example, when he was talking, I just thought about the bronze serpent. So like in Numbers 21, God commands Moses to make a bronze serpent and put it on a pole so that anyone that was bitten by the poisonous snakes would live if they looked at it. But over hundreds of years, what happens? The Israelites started to burn incense to the bronze object itself and idolized. So it became an object of worship. Was that a surprise to God? Or even, let's say, even if you didn't have that particular view of God, that still was the consequence of the providing this particular means, this mechanism of salvation from the getting bit, of healing. And so there's tons of things like that in the scripture, just tons of things like that in the Bible, where the Ark of the Covenant had eventually began to be used in a very kind of mechanical sense. Well, we have it, we got the victory. But here's the thing, like beforehand, there were times where they wouldn't have gotten the victory without that ark present with them, right? And then God lets them fall because they're being misguided in these kinds of things. And my point is to say, you can look at the sacrificial system, you can look at the bronze serpent, you can look at the Ark of the Covenant, you can look at things in the New Testament itself, okay? So, for example, Peter baptizes Simon Magus or Simon the Magician. Probably baptizing him, okay, with Christian baptism, makes the guy think he's good, he's in. And what happens? He wants to buy the power of the Spirit, and Peter tells him, you have no part or lot in this matter, okay? But to think that this man initially being received by the Christian community had no influence on the way he thought about things, it just is ridiculous, right? But that wasn't a good outcome. That's my point. So we just can't be consequentialist, however you spin that.
And to be precise, it's not that consequences have no relation
That's right.
to the morality of an action. Ananias and Sapphira, for example, they sell their property, they lie about the price, they say they gave it all, and they die as a result. Okay, that's a consequence. But here is the key issue with consequentialism is lying about the price was not wrong because they died. That's not, it happened, it's related.
That's right.
But that's not the reason. It was wrong for another reason. It happened to be shown through that consequence, which we're told scripturally. But we're also told other times that something that seems bad to us was in fact not a consequence of sin. So, for example, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus is like, neither one. Like they were assuming a consequentialist system of ethics. That's the whole point of that question. They're like, this bad thing, this guy's born blind, somebody sinned, who was it, Jesus? Jesus is like, no, I'm going to glorify myself through this, and you're going to see in a way that this blind man will see. The whole system of consequentialism, it doesn't work scripturally. It's not that the consequences don't ever relate, but it is that if you're going to say, in a moment, looking at an action, is this wrong or is it not? You can't determine that based on its consequence.
Yeah, that's right.
And that can never be done that way. The only way you might argue it in any context would be to say God, from the standpoint of knowing all of the future, can say God works together all things for good. So a good ultimate ending, if you will, a good ultimate consequence, God works all things. So you can say God does good, and that is seen in the goodness of the consequences. Sure, maybe you could do that, but I'm not God. I don't know the future. I don't know the consequences without any question, without any hesitation, without any doubt. So for a human to adapt a consequentialist system of ethics means either you're never going to really know something is right or wrong when you do it, because you don't know the results, or you're assuming arrogantly that you do know all of the consequences and therefore taking the place of God. So it's always one of those two. You either sacrifice real knowledge of morality or you arrogantly claim to be God, to take a consequentialist view of this action is right or wrong based on consequences that are future.
Yeah. And along making unwise and sinful decisions, consequences can affect, not in the ultimate way as like, no matter what you do, if you have a good result, it's a good thing. But it plays a role also in if you are intending an evil and harmful result.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not so disconnected where, okay, like to go back to your Charles Angels example, he wants his brother to be destroyed, and so that's why he's doing that. That would be evil. That would be corrupt. But if the intention, like you said, out of brotherly love was good, okay, then it wasn't that when I saw it, I thought, man, he really loved his brother. It doesn't now become hatred. It doesn't become something else other than love because a bad result came out of it. So, Jed pointed out character, conduct, and intention. I think we just have to keep that in view too in those situations. But because of that, what are we intending? So yes, if we're intending evil, okay, then the very thing you're intending, not because we can, by the way, not even because you can guarantee that evil thing comes about, by the way, okay? Because that's not, so it's still not consequentialism there. It's just your desire for it to be that way. That's when it's wicked.
I was helped a lot by a professor named David Jones who talked through some of that, and the way he talked about character, conduct, and intent was really helpful to me because we tend to think only of one specific thing. In a consequentialist case, we think of consequences. In a duty case, we think of command only. In a virtue case, we tend to think of character probably more than anything else. But it really, you have to know all of those. In that, I haven't seen the show, but in that case, it sounds like you have a brother, which should be a good relationship. In theory, you have to say, well, is it? But assumedly, it's a good relationship. And you go, this isn't a enemy on a field of battle fighting against you. This is someone you expect the character of who they are should be. They want that. The conduct is go to a doctor. So he's telling him something that sounds like a potentially good thing, right? And the intent is clearly, I want to save you. We could do the same thing if we were to say a person came into the room, laid you down on a table, took a blade, and cut on you. You go like, okay, is it murder or surgery?
Yeah.
I don't actually know yet. I could even go further. They knock you out, which is also true in both cases, right? So I still don't know. What I need to know is the character. Is this a criminal or is it a doctor? Hopefully not overlap between the two. Is this a criminal or a doctor? They're doing the same conduct in one sense, but maybe not exactly. It could look like it from a distance, but their intent is so radically different. And I think as Christians, it is good for us to have a complex view of ethics. I want to have the kind of character that I am shaped by the fruit of the Spirit, that I add to my faith virtue and to virtue knowledge and all of those things that Peter talks about. That should be the character, what drives me. The conduct, I'm given certain conduct. Speak truth in love. Don't let corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but such as builds you up. I'm given conduct repeatedly. Love your wife as Christ loves the church. I'm given conduct repeatedly, but if I do that instead of good Christian character, I want to be like Jesus. If I say, I'm going to love my wife because it makes my life a whole lot happier, and that's the only reason, it's not really good actions, even though the conduct might look like it. Or if the intent, you go, all right, I want to be a good Christian, and I really want to follow these commands. I want to speak the truth in love. But my intent is to make sure that guy feels so embarrassingly awful about what he's doing. Whoa. Like, that's not... We instinctively know some of these things, but we don't think about it with that kind of complexity. And I think it is helpful for us to go character, conduct, intent. That's going to tell you what's actually going on. That's a much better system for us to work with than consequences, because I can't know the consequences. I can know God has given me certain conduct. God has told me intent that are good and intent that are evil. God has given me character as a child of God that I'm supposed to live out.
So did Rahab sin when she hid the spies and lied to the king's men? That's essentially what you can't even begin to really tackle that with all of the nuance without a view like this.
Yeah, you would have to.
Or it's World War II and Hitler is...
And somebody knocks on the door and says, are you hiding Jews?
Right.
Do you say yes?
Right.
And even in less serious ways, I find that this actually is really helpful to say, can Christians play bluffing games? I'm lying, maybe. I'm not telling truth, but is that really the thing? Can a Christian try to set up a surprise birthday party and they go, hey, are we going to a birthday party? And you're like, oh, what do I say? Like, those are questions that we need a kind of complexity around ethics to be able to even wrestle with them. But I think you get to it when you start going, okay, character, conduct, intent. There's clearly contexts where in war you deceive for various ways. That might be a direct lie. That might be deception. We could go down that ethical. Is there a difference between lying and deception and all those kind of things, right? But I think it gives a framework to say, what's the character, what's the conduct, what's the intent? Is that matching with what God has said? But it frees us, because what I would say you can't do is say Rahab must have done a good thing because the spies weren't killed. Again, you can't sit here and do the consequentialist move, which people do with that, or must have been a good thing because the Jews weren't killed. I'm not saying it wasn't good. I'm saying you can't judge it that way.
A painful result does not automatically make a decision wrong. We are responsible for our character, conduct, and intent. We should act wisely, obey God's word, and honestly examine our motives, yet the final outcome remains in God's hands. That raises another question. Ecclesiastes says wisdom cannot uncover the scheme of things. If wisdom cannot explain how everything fits together or guarantee what happens next, what kind of protection does wisdom actually provide? That is where we are headed next time on Reverberate.